dawn, the seafront of Colombo, capital city of Sri Lanka. A cool breeze is blowing in off the Indian Ocean. Soon the sun will bring in the flies and bake the city pavements into ovens. But Sri Lanka is a rural country, still beautiful, still unpolluted. The British, who were masters here for a century and a half, called it Ceylon. On furlough, they rested here, away from the dust and drought of India. In this issue, Echo looks at a tropical paradise now threatened by the iron logic of a booming birth rate, mass unemployment and power politics. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a lush, fertile island with an almost perfect climate. Almost anything planted here will grow and bear fruit. Here, the winds of change have not yet made staying alive difficult. Most of the island's 13 million inhabitants live on the land. Once, the vast acreage of rice paddy were ideal breeding grounds for malaria. Until the 1940s, it killed 100,000 people a year. It was eradicated with DDT. People stopped dying, but the habit of large families lived on. The population doubled. Sri Lanka has never had a chance to catch her breath. The next generation arrives to strain resources before the present generation is ready for it. The potential is there, but the birth rate forever outstrips the plans and the planners. This country is one of the world's major producers of tea. It earns most of the foreign currency Sri Lanka needs to buy the machines and the techniques to exploit her resources. But she suffers the dilemma of most developing countries. The machines have got dearer, while the price of her tea has dropped. This is an ancient country. Her written history spans 2,500 years. Her incredible fertility attracted many invaders hungry for wealth. First Indians, then from the west, Portuguese, Dutch, and last the British. They came to trade and later to subjugate. When the British left in 1948, they had changed the country radically. In 1931, they had given every adult in the land the right to vote within a parliamentary system. It still survives. Free elections are still being held. The last, in 1970, were won by a woman, Sirimavo Bandaranaike. In 1960, she had been the first woman prime minister in the world when she succeeded her husband after he had been brutally assassinated. Now she is back in power. A devout Buddhist, daughter of a wealthy landowner, yet the strong leader of a coalition of socialists, communists, and even Trotskyites. Soon after her triumph, she and her ministers left their desks for a day to help dig the foundations of a memorial to her husband, Solomon Bandaranaike. He was the founder of the vast welfare system that now weighed heavy round his wife's neck. Free health and education, subsidized food and transport. There was little money left to invest in change. The people didn't starve, but they had little to strive for. They were imprisoned within a manual economy. The average wage of about $37 a month was earned in inflated rupees. Imported manufactured goods were incredibly expensive. Mercifully, food remained cheap. In Colombo, a few lived the lives of the Victorian English. Theirs were the habits the British left behind. Despite independence, many Sri Lankans have clung to the affectations of their former imperial rulers. But few could join their ranks, and in spite of the government's benevolent socialism, the queues of workless poor grew. But the country had inherited much else besides cricket from the British. Before they left, they had built up the best education system in Asia. But it was a system tuned more to the needs of Britain than this rural country. The result was a permanent surplus of well-trained young men and women overqualified for the jobs available. Each year, hundreds of thousands of teenagers joined the queue for white-collar jobs. On the night of April the 4th, 1971, their frustration exploded. All over the country, rebels overpowered the police and turned their guns on the government. The government was in serious trouble. Military aid was rushed in from Britain, India, and even China. It took weeks of vicious and bloody fighting to get the rebels behind bars. Who fomented and financed their frustration is still a mystery. At the time, the North Korean communists were blamed and their embassy was closed down. But Mrs. Bandaranaike and her government survived. Last year, Mrs. Bandaranaike was given a tumultuous welcome by the well-drilled crowds of Peking. Zhou Enlai hardly left her side for 10 days. She was the first VIP to see Mao Zedong since Nixon. But this was no empty spectacular. She was desperate for money to shore up her government's policies. Zhou obliged with a massive interest-free loan. Nobody said what China wanted in return. Many believe that a power struggle has begun between China and the Soviets for domination of the Indian Ocean, and that Zhou is trying to counter Russia's long-term interests in the Indian subcontinent. So far, the only thing Mrs. Bandaranaike has been seen to have given China is a baby elephant. Back at home, the young are not dancing yet to Mao's tune. But China's money has helped Mrs. Bandaranaike to get the economy back in step. The price has been austerity. The welfare system cut back, the rich savagely taxed, imports cut to a trickle. They still have their dreams, impossible dreams for generations yet. Sri Lanka's national fascination for beauty contests is not much of a safety valve. But if they lose their patience, they lose their one vital asset, democracy and free speech. But now, for one night, somebody's dreams do come true.